The telegram arrived at 7:03 p.m. on August 14, 1945, and the Pentagon War Room fell silent for the first time in 4 years. General Marcus Whitfield read the message twice. Then a third time. The words refused to become real. Japan had accepted the Potsdam Declaration. The Emperor himself had intervened, overruling his war council. After 6 years of global conflict, after 50 million dead, after 2 atomic bombs had turned Hiroshima and Nagasaki into ash and shadow, it was over, but Whitfield did not smile. He did not embrace the officers standing frozen around the map table. He set down the telegram and walked to the window overlooking the Potomac River, where the last light of summer painted the water gold. "Sir." Colonel Henderson's voice trembled. "Should we inform the President?" "Truman already knows." Whitfield's reflection stared back at him, gaunt and gray. He was 54 years old and looked 70. What he doesn't know is what happens next. The War Room held 37 officers, each representing a different branch of America's Pacific Command structure. They had spent the last 3 days without sleep, coordinating the planned invasion of mainland Japan, Operation Downfall, the largest amphibious assault in human history. 1 million American soldiers were positioned across the Pacific, ready to storm Japanese beaches. Military planners estimated the invasion would cost between 400,000 and 800,000 American casualties. Japanese deaths would number in the millions. Now those plans were worthless paper. "We have 3 million men scattered across 12 time zones," Whitfield said, turning to face his staff. "We have carrier groups, submarine fleets, bomber squadrons, and infantry divisions all primed for combat. The Japanese have accepted surrender, but their forces in the field don't know that yet. Some won't believe it. Some won't care." He walked to the massive map dominating the room's center. Red pins marked Japanese positions: Manchuria, Korea, the Philippines, Indonesia, countless Pacific islands where soldiers had dug into caves and sworn to die rather than surrender. Blue pins marked American forces, surrounding the red like a closing fist. "The Emperor will broadcast his surrender tomorrow at noon Tokyo time. That's midnight here. But radio communication across the Pacific is unreliable at best. Some units won't receive the message for days. Some Japanese commanders will assume it's American propaganda. And some," he paused, his jaw tightening. "Some will choose to keep fighting regardless." Major Patricia Shaw stepped forward. She was one of 3 women in the room, assigned to naval intelligence, and she had been tracking Japanese submarine movements for the past 18 months. "Sir, we've lost contact with at least 6 Japanese submarine groups in the past 48 hours. That's roughly 2,000 men operating independently, with orders to attack American shipping on sight." "And our own forces?" Whitfield asked. "Captain James Reardon's destroyer group is patrolling the waters near Okinawa. His son died in a kamikaze attack 3 weeks ago. I don't think he'll hesitate to engage any Japanese vessel he encounters." The room absorbed this information in heavy silence. Whitfield understood the mathematics of tragedy. Every hour that passed between Japan's surrender and effective ceasefire would cost lives: American boys who had survived 4 years of island-hopping hell, Japanese soldiers who had never been given the choice to fight. All of them dying for a war that had already ended. "I need to draft a declaration," Whitfield said. "Not just for the press. For our forces. For the Japanese. Something that makes clear the fighting is finished, that any further bloodshed serves nothing but grief. Washington wants celebration, sir." Henderson's voice carried warning. "The President wants victory parades, church bells, dancing in the streets. Then Washington can wait." Whitfield picked up a pen, staring at the blank paper before him. "I lost my brother at Pearl Harbor. I've spent 4 years dreaming of this moment, imagining how it would feel to know we'd won. Do you know what I feel now, Colonel?" Henderson shook his head. "Fear." Whitfield began to write. "I feel fear. Because the hardest part of any war isn't winning it. It's ending it without losing your soul. Outside, the sun finished setting over Washington. Somewhere in the Pacific, American and Japanese forces drifted toward each other through dark water, unaware that the world had changed. The telegram sat on Whitfield's desk, its words already history, but history, Whitfield knew, was written by survivors. And there were still men who might not survive the peace. 12,000 miles from Washington, Major Patricia Shaw stood on the bridge of the USS Missouri and watched the Philippine Sea swallow the last traces of daylight. The battleship had been at sea for 16 days, its crew of nearly 3,000 men living in a state of permanent exhaustion. They had bombarded Japanese coastal positions, escorted troop transports, and dodged kamikaze attacks that came screaming out of clear skies with no warning. Now they waited for orders that might send them to die on the beaches of Japan itself. Shaw had transferred aboard 3 days ago, carrying classified intelligence reports that could not be trusted to radio transmission. She was 31 years old, fluent in Japanese, and one of the Navy's most valuable assets in the Pacific theater. She was also invisible in official records, a ghost who moved between commands, gathering information that admirals used to make decisions that killed thousands. The ceasefire order arrived at 2,300 hours local time, encoded and authenticated through 3 separate channels. Shaw decoded it herself, her fingers steady despite the magnitude of what she read. Japan had surrendered. All American forces were to halt offensive operations immediately. Any Japanese units attempting to surrender were to be treated with dignity and protected from harm. She brought the message to Captain William Mercer, the Missouri's commanding officer. He read it in silence, then handed it back. "That's it, then," he said. "For years, and it ends with a piece of paper. It ends when the shooting stops, sir. And that hasn't happened yet." Shaw spread her intelligence maps across the navigation table. 6 red circles marked the last known positions of Japanese submarine group Kiku 7, 6 vessels carrying torpedoes, mines, and nearly 2,000 sailors who had sworn loyalty to an empire that no longer wanted their deaths. "They went dark 48 hours ago," she explained. "Standard protocol when approaching enemy waters. They're supposed to surface for radio contact every 12 hours, but we've heard nothing. Which means they haven't received the surrender order. Which means they're still hunting." Mercer studied the map. The red circles formed a loose arc northeast of Okinawa, directly in the path of Captain James Reardon's destroyer group. For American ships, 800 men, sailing straight toward an enemy that didn't know the war was over. "Reardon lost his son," Mercer said quietly. "The boy was a pilot on the Essex. Kamikaze hit his squadron during a routine patrol. They never found the body." "I know." Shaw had read Reardon's file. Decorated veteran of Midway and Leyte Gulf. Brilliant tactician. A man who had watched too many friends die and had stopped believing in anything except vengeance. "That's why I need to reach him before he finds those submarines." "You think he'd attack after receiving ceasefire orders?" "I think grief makes men do terrible things. And I think 2,000 Japanese sailors dying in the last hours of a finished war would haunt this Navy forever." Mercer was silent for a long moment. Outside, the Pacific stretched endless and black, hiding secrets that could still draw blood. "What do you need?" "A fast patrol boat. A radio operator who speaks Japanese. And permission to do something incredibly stupid." She found Tommy Huang in the Missouri's radio room, a 20-year-old communications specialist from San Francisco who had been translating intercepted Japanese signals for the past 8 months. His family was still in the Manzanar internment camp, locked behind barbed wire because America had decided that Japanese ancestry made them enemies. Despite this, Tommy had volunteered for service the day he turned 18. "You want me to broadcast surrender terms to Japanese submarines?" He stared at Shaw as if she had suggested he fly to the moon. "Ma'am, they'll think it's a trap. They'll torpedo us the moment they hear an American vessel transmitting in Japanese." "That's possible." Shaw met his eyes steadily. "But there's also a chance that someone on those submarines wants to go home. Someone who's tired of dying. Someone who just needs to hear that it's okay to stop fighting. Tommy thought of his grandmother, who had taught him Japanese lullabies in their garden before the FBI came. He thought of his parents, who had lost everything and still told him to serve his country with honor. When do we leave? Shaw smiled, the first genuine smile she had allowed herself in months. Now. Before Captain Reardon decides to end this war his own way. The patrol boat launched at midnight, cutting through swells that rose and fell like the breathing of some vast sleeping creature. Behind them, the Missouri's lights faded into darkness. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the thin hope that words might succeed where bullets had failed. Tommy Huang began preparing his broadcast. Somewhere beneath the black water, Japanese sailors waited for orders that would never come. The race had begun. 300 feet beneath the Pacific Ocean, Vice Admiral Kenji Tanaka listened to static and wondered if his emperor had truly surrendered. The I-401 was the largest submarine ever built, 400 feet of steel designed to carry aircraft across the Pacific and strike the American mainland. Tanaka had commanded her for 11 months, surviving depth charges, destroyer attacks, and the slow starvation of a supply line that had collapsed months ago. His crew of 200 men had not seen land in 6 weeks. They survived on rationed rice and water recycled from the submarine's engines. The radio transmission had come through at 0300 hours, garbled fragments of the emperor's voice, speaking words no Japanese ruler had ever spoken. Surrender. Endure the unendurable. Bear the unbearable. It's American deception, Commander Yoshida insisted, his face twisted with fury in the red emergency lighting. The Americans have captured our codes. They're broadcasting false messages to confuse our forces. Tanaka said nothing. He had attended naval conferences in Washington before the war, spoken with American officers, shared meals with men who were now his enemies. He knew their tactics, their capabilities. But he also knew the quality of the voice he had heard. That was the emperor. That was Hirohito himself, speaking to his people for the first time in history. We have orders, Yoshida continued. Attack American shipping. Die with honor. That is our duty. Our duty is to Japan, Tanaka replied quietly. Not to death. Above them, somewhere in the darkness, American destroyers were hunting. Tanaka had heard their sonar pings for the past 4 hours, methodical, patient, closing in. His submarine was silent, drifting on minimal power, but eventually they would be found. And then the choice would be made for them. The second transmission began at 0447 hours. It came through on an open frequency, broadcasting in Japanese that carried the accent of someone who had learned the language from family rather than schools. A young voice, earnest and exhausted. To all Japanese naval vessels in the Okinawa sector. My name is Tommy Huang. I am a United States Navy communications specialist. The war has ended. Emperor Hirohito has accepted surrender terms. All hostilities are ordered to cease. Please surface and identify yourselves. You will not be attacked. Repeat, you will not be attacked. The fighting is over. You can go home. The submarine's radio room fell silent. Tanaka watched his crew absorb the words, young men, most of them, who had joined the Navy expecting glory and found only hunger and fear. Some wept openly. Others stared at nothing, unable to process what they had heard. Yoshida drew his pistol. This is enemy propaganda. I will execute any man who suggests surrender. Put that away. Tanaka's voice was steel. You will not execute anyone on my vessel. Then I will relieve you of command. You will try. The two men faced each other in the cramped control room, surrounded by sailors who had survived years of war and now watched their officers decide their fate. Tanaka was 53 years old, tired beyond measure, carrying the weight of every man he had lost. Yoshida was 31, burning with the certainty of youth, unable to imagine a world where Japan was not eternal and victorious. The American voice continued broadcasting. Tommy Huang spoke of peace, of families waiting, of a future that did not require dying. His Japanese was imperfect but sincere. "I know you have no reason to trust us," the voice said. "But I am asking you to try. Surface your vessels. Let us see each other as men, not enemies. The war took everything from us. Don't let it take this moment too." Tanaka thought of his wife, Michiko, waiting in Yokohama. He thought of his daughter, who had been 12 when he left for sea and was now 16. He thought of the shrine where his ancestors were honored, and the garden where he had planned to grow old. "Surface the boat," he ordered. Yoshida raised his pistol. A sailor named Nakamura, 19 years old, from a fishing village near Osaka, stepped between them. "Sir," Nakamura said to Yoshida, "I want to go home." Other sailors moved to stand beside him. One by one, the crew chose peace. Yoshida lowered his weapon. His face showed not anger but grief, the death of everything he had believed in. Tanaka almost pitied him. "Surface the boat," Tanaka repeated. "And prepare a white flag." The I-401 rose through black water toward a sky full of stars. Somewhere above, American destroyers waited. Somewhere beyond, Captain Reardon's finger hovered over the firing switch, but Tommy Huang was still broadcasting. And Tanaka was still listening. The longest night of the Pacific War was not yet over. Captain James Reardon saw the submarine surface at 0512 hours, and his hand moved to the firing controls before his mind understood what he was seeing. The I-401 rose from the Pacific like a leviathan, water streaming from her hull, her conning tower breaking through swells that caught the first gray light of dawn. She was enormous, longer than his destroyer, bristling with deck guns and aircraft hangars. A killing machine built to end American lives, and she was flying a white flag. "Captain." His executive officer's voice was sharp with disbelief. "They're surrendering." Reardon stared at the enemy vessel. 3 weeks ago, a Japanese pilot had flown his Zero directly into the flight deck of the USS Essex. The fireball had consumed 17 aircraft and 43 men, including Lieutenant David Reardon, 22 years old, who had written his father a letter the night before saying he was looking forward to coming home. The letter had arrived in Pearl Harbor the same day as the casualty report. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the patrol boat. Major Shaw is requesting we hold fire." Shaw. The intelligence officer who had been sending frantic messages all night, warning him about Japanese submarines in his patrol zone, ordering him to avoid engagement. As if she understood anything about what he had lost. "They killed my son." Reardon heard his own voice as if from a great distance. "They killed my son, and now they want mercy." The bridge crew stood frozen. Every man aboard the USS Henderson knew what the captain had suffered. Many of them had lost friends to kamikazes, to torpedoes, to the 1,000 ways the Pacific War had consumed American youth. They would follow whatever order Reardon gave. His finger touched the firing switch, the radio crackled again. A young voice, speaking from the patrol boat anchored between his destroyers and the surfacing submarine. "Captain Reardon, this is Communications Specialist Tommy Huang. I've been in contact with Vice Admiral Tanaka aboard the Japanese submarine. He has accepted surrender. He's ordering his men to stand down. Sir, there are 200 sailors on that boat who want to go home to their families. The war is over. Please, let it be over." Reardon closed his eyes. He saw David's face, not the formal portrait in dress whites, but the boy who had learned to ride a bicycle in their backyard, who had cried when his dog died, who had hugged his father at the San Diego docks and promised to come back safe. He would never come back. No declaration could change that. No surrender could bring him home, but 200 Japanese sailors, young men who had never chosen this war, were waiting to see if they would live or die. And David, his David, who had volunteered for the most dangerous missions because he believed in something bigger than himself, what would David want? Reardon opened his eyes. The submarine floated motionless, her crew emerging onto the deck with their hands raised. The white flag caught the rising sun. "Stand down," he said. "All weapons stand down." The tension on the bridge dissolved into exhaustion. Reardon released the firing switch and walked to the window, watching the enemy become something else: survivors, prisoners, men who would go home to families who had already begun mourning them. "Send a message to Major Shaw," he ordered. Tell her we're holding position. No hostile action. And tell that radio operator," he paused, searching for words that could carry the weight of what he felt. "Tell him thank you." 6,000 miles away, General Marcus Whitfield stood before the press corps in Washington and set aside his prepared remarks. "Gentlemen," he began, "I am not here to announce victory. Victory implies that someone has won. But 50 million people are dead. Cities have been erased from the earth. An entire generation has been consumed by fire." He paused, gathering himself. "What I am here to announce is an end. Not triumph, but cessation. Not celebration, but relief that the killing has finally, mercifully stopped." The reporters scribbled furiously. This was not the speech they had expected. Last night, American and Japanese forces faced each other in the waters near Okinawa. For a moment, the war threatened to continue beyond its official end. But a young man named Tommy Huang broadcast a message of peace across dark water. A Japanese admiral named Kenji Tanaka chose surrender over death. An American captain named James Reardon chose mercy over vengeance. Whitfield looked directly into the cameras. These men ended the war. Not generals, not politicians, ordinary people who decided that enough blood had been spilled. He folded the prepared statement and placed it in his pocket. "This is what America's High Command declares: we accept Japan's surrender with solemnity, not celebration. We honor our dead by ensuring they are the last to fall. And we move forward not as conquerors, but as men and women who have glimpsed the abyss and chosen to step back from its edge." The room was silent. Somewhere in California, inside the barbed wire of Manzanar, Tommy Huang's parents listened to the broadcast on a borrowed radio and wept for their son, who had spoken peace into the darkness and been heard. The war was over. The world would never be the same, but in the space between enemies, where words had crossed water and found willing ears, something new had begun, fragile, uncertain, and precious beyond measure: hope.